All right, grab your Bibles, turn to Exodus. We are going to be looking at chapters 1 and 2 tonight. So we've got a good bit to read. What's up?
I already know what the two chapters are already about.
Okay, well, we're going to read through them, and then we'll talk about them, okay? So, we are going to go through and read, but instead of reading like one verse at a time, we're going to read one paragraph at a time, okay? Sound good? Fair enough? Everybody know the difference between a verse and a paragraph? Please.
No, I was going to say for one game.
Okay.
There's no way.
Chapter 1 and 2. Start with chapter 1, verse 1. Everybody there? Everybody good?
Mine was the King James?
Yes.
Oh, it's good.
All right, I'll start us off, and then we're going to jump over here. So I'm going to cut across.
No!
You'll go after me, and then we'll cut across here. How's that? And then we'll jump over to Grace, cut across these guys, and then loop around the back, okay? Everybody got the flow?
Can you repeat that?
Come
To show her
on.
how higher IQ.
You go there,
There, across, back to Grace,
Oh, okay.
across, back to Brad, and then back across.
Okay.
A program needs your permission to continue. What is that? That's Java. Oh, it's an updater. You want to look at an update? It's probably good right now. It's up. A paragraph. You see where it indents? Yeah, like that's a paragraph, and then like this.
And what funny that's
That's like
little cute girls.
so yours is going to be verse. You'll start verse 15. Okay. Verse 15 until the end of chapter 1.
I mean, like,
Okay? All right, good deal. Ready?
This isn't mine though. This is my upload. But mine is like a little.
See, I learned that from working with elementary kids too. All right, Exodus chapter 1, verse 1. God knew. I love that that's how it ends. And God knew. He knew. It's okay. He knew. All right, so let's just kind of go back over and hit the highlights of the story. What's going on here? Because there's a lot happening in these two chapters. Verses 1 to 7 talks about a guy named Joseph, right? And Joseph dies, and Israel, like, explodes. Okay? Long story short, that's what happens. Jump back to Genesis chapter 50, it's the previous page, and it kind of fills in some gaps for us. It says, so Joseph remained in Egypt. Now, do you guys remember who Joseph is? Okay, Joseph from the coat of many colors. He was his daddy's favorite. His brother sold him into slavery. He ends up in Egypt as a slave and then ends up in, like, Pharaoh's court. Okay? So he goes from a slave to bigwig in the nation, like ruling over the entire nation of Israel. That's the Joseph we're talking about. And Joseph lived 110 years. And Joseph saw Ephraim's children of the third generation. The children also of Machir and of Manasseh were counted as Joseph's own. So Joseph has ended up bringing his whole family into Egypt, and that's why it says that Joseph was already there. When in chapter 1 it starts listing out the whole family, the 70 people. That's who came over into Egypt after Joseph was already there. So basically, Joseph dies. It's a sad thing, but Israel grows. It explodes. We're talking about 5 generations. Okay, Joseph and his brothers, that generation, they were in Israel. Joseph's sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, that generation was in Egypt. And then 3 generations after Ephraim. 5 generations. That's the span of time that we're looking at. From the time that Joseph and his family got there to when the Exodus occurred. We're looking at some 215 or so years. So it starts out with about 70 people. Okay, this nation of Israel is 70 people. Not really a nation, it's a big family, right? Okay, how would you like that for a family reunion? Fun stuff. By the time we are at this point, Israel, the family of Israel, is about 2 million people. 2 million people from 70, 2 million in 200 years. Not a bad growth rate. But that's what's going on here. Jump down to verses 8 to 14. Explain to me just a little bit about what's going on there.
There was a new Pharaoh in Egypt.
Okay, we have a new Pharaoh in Egypt. What's unique about this Pharaoh compared to the last one?
Because like Joseph was the new Pharaoh, I'm guessing.
No, Joseph wasn't the new Pharaoh. When I said he was ruling over Egypt, he was like third in command.
Oh.
Okay, he wasn't over Pharaoh, he wasn't the Pharaoh, but Pharaoh said, you know what? I want you to rule my whole kingdom because you're a smart guy. And he put everything under Joseph's command except Pharaoh himself.
Oh, okay.
Okay? So, but the question is, what is different between that Pharaoh that knew Joseph and put him in charge and this new Pharaoh?
Oh, he was. Oh,
Okay? Find
Well,
out.
the old Pharaoh was okay with having 2 million people live, but this new guy's fearing them, and he's fearing what they're going to become, and like a riot and war.
Okay. That's the end result of it. Right. Small thing.
He didn't know the covenant that Pharaoh had made with Joseph.
And there wasn't really a covenant made
It was just
necessarily.
a promise that they could live there
What does
and
the
live
verse say?
alongside of him.
Yeah, what does the verse say?
He didn't know Joseph.
There
He
you go.
didn't know Joseph. Okay? That's the difference. Okay? The first Pharaoh and Joseph had a really, really good relationship. They knew each other, but Joseph died. His family's still around, but Joseph died. And now we have a new Pharaoh that didn't know Joseph. Now, usually when there was a new Pharaoh, it was because one Pharaoh died and his sons stepped up and took his place, right? That's how most kings become king. But not always. What's the other way that a new king becomes king?
The king dies and there's no one to reign over him. They usually they make a vote for who's going to be the next king.
They don't usually take a vote. There's usually some family member in line. But what's the other way that it's not passed down from one family member to another?
A country would move in and would take over.
Right. It's a war. And that's probably what happened here, is there's a new Pharaoh. Because if it had been the original Pharaoh's son, he would have known Joseph. Joseph was in the court. He was in the house. He hung out with, he had dinner with Pharaoh. Okay? That Pharaoh's sons would have known him. This is a new Pharaoh who came in and by military force took over. So he doesn't know who Joseph is. He doesn't know who his family is. All he knows is there's this group of people, and that's at about 2 million now. That's a lot of people. And he's going, that could be a problem for us. So we have a new king. He's ignorant of Joseph. He's afraid of the Hebrews just because of their sheer numbers. Just because there's 2 million of them. And so he says, what can we do about this? Well, let's enslave them. Let's make them slaves. And part of his point was to kill them off. His hope was to work these guys, the men especially, into the ground and just kill them off. That was the plan. Didn't work. What happened? His plan was to work them till they died. What happened?
They didn't die and they kept growing.
Right, they didn't die. They just kept having babies. Yay, Jordan! Okay? They just keep having babies. Even though these guys are being worked into the ground. Now, it's an interesting thing here because up to now, how have we referred to Joseph's family, that 70 people that turns into 2 million people? What do we keep talking about them as?
They're growing. They're like keep growing as much because since he died, like I'm guessing, like they gave his other family like an option, or not an option, like some kind of hope to like keep on growing and like take back Egypt.
You're hitting around it. We talk about this as the sons of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Okay, generations after Manasseh. We talk in terms of family. It was a family. When it was 70 people, it was a family. At 2 million people, it's more than a family. It's a nation. It's a people group. And if you look at verse 9, okay, this is Pharaoh talking, the new Pharaoh, the ignorant Pharaoh. And he said to his people, okay, the other Egyptians, behold the people of Israel. Okay? Not just the sons, not just this family, but the people. The word in the Hebrew is talking about a nation or a people group. A group of people that are tied by culture and language, different from others in the country. Okay? They were not Egyptian. They were all related, and they all spoke the same language. And it was not Egyptian. They were now a people group. And this Pharaoh is the first person to recognize that. And this is, I mean, if you've ever wondered, how in the world did Abraham become a nation? It was while they were in Egypt. They had great prosperity. And then great enslavement, great burden. And they grew under both as a nation, as a people group. This is where it happened, in Egypt. But again, it happened largely by way of slavery. So jump into verse 15. This is where the king of Egypt, the Pharaoh, calls in the midwives. And he calls two by name. It's not that they were the only two midwives that were among the people of Israel. They were probably just the trainers of the midwives. They were the guild leaders. Okay, they were the best of the best as far as midwives go. So what does he tell these midwives to do? After he's tried to work all the men into the ground, what does he tell the midwives to do?
Call them all together and start having babies?
No. Quite the opposite.
Oh, wait, no.
Quite the-
He says to kill all the male children.
Right. You go to a Hebrew woman, she's having a baby, you figure out that baby's a boy, kill him. He orders infanticide. He wants to kill all the male babies. Why the males, not the females?
Oh wait. Because I'm guessing like the males could, once they grow older, they could probably get enough strength to come at Pharaoh.
Right. Who's easier to control, generally speaking? Men or women?
Men.
No, women are easier to control.
Sorry.
And part of that is because they were hoping that the women would marry Egyptian men and just assimilate to the culture. And essentially erase the Israelite nation altogether. So, what did the midwives do?
They didn't kill the babies because they feared God.
Right, they feared God. So they defied Pharaoh, who could have their heads, by the way.
Pharaoh.
Right, Pharaoh could have their heads. And they said, no, we're not going to do that. What did they do instead? They let the babies live, but when Pharaoh comes back and says, why have you done this? What do they say?
They lied.
They lied. At least we assume that it's a lie.
Well, I guess it could have some truth. to it.
Yeah, I've read some commentators said, this wasn't really a lie. It really could have been that the Hebrew women just had the babies on their own. Done. Don't need a midwife. Oh, Anna, how likely is that? We know it's not impossible, but...
I feel like their excuse,
Go ahead.
I feel like their excuse, to the Pharaoh was that they were so vigorous in birth, by the time the midwives actually got there, they already had the baby.
Yes, it was already done.
Yeah, so they didn't,
Yeah,
I
they
think
didn't need a midwife. Man, what were we going to do?
Yeah.
They were done and gone before we even got there.
I think you can conclude that if they were telling a story just because they feared God and they didn't follow him.
There is definitely a strong hint here that they were making a choice of who to follow. They feared God more than they feared Pharaoh. Starting in chapter 2. Well, it also goes on at the end of chapter 1. After he can't get the midwives to do his dirty work, Pharaoh tells the Egyptians, when you find out that a Hebrew has had a baby, and if it's a boy, you as an Egyptian, you take the baby, throw him in the Nile. Kill him. Okay? So that's the new plan. Plan B is for the Egyptians to just kill all these kids. So, what happens in chapter 2?
Moses.
Right. Moses is born. Now, Moses is a Hebrew. He's Levite, but he's a Hebrew, right? So, according to the decree, somebody's supposed to throw him in the river. right?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. What does Mama do? What does Mama Levite do?
She makes a basket.
What does she do first?
Oh, wait.
Read the passage.
I know this one.
Somebody else, it's quicker.
And when she saw that he was a fine child, she
She hit him for like 3 months.
yes, she hit him for 3 months. Okay, but I hope that you guys have never had to try and hide a baby, but I can't imagine it's easy. Okay, but she hid this baby for 3 months. She can't hide him anymore. So what'd she do?
She
Oh,
grabbed.
you know what? Joy. What'd she do?
Wait, she made this basket out of leaves and tar and other stuff.
It wasn't leaves,
And
it
then-
was like bulrushes.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
right.
the green.
Same thing. Papyrus. Okay, anyways. So, and then she put the baby in it and she put it in the river.
Right.
So technically she did put the baby in the
Fresh
river.
oil chips.
Just not have the
Right. Yeah. It definitely didn't happen the way Pharaoh was hoping. So, but there's a little bit more to this story, okay? Mama Levite puts Moses, who isn't Moses yet, technically, we don't have his name, but she puts the baby in a basket on the river, sends him out. Now, I want to know what Levite mama goes, I think we're just going to stick the baby in a basket and put him out on the Nile River, and, I don't think the crocodiles are going to get him because they just chewed off the dude's leg down the river the other day. They probably aren't hungry anymore, so he should be okay.
Oh, I know this one.
There's a scheme behind this, okay?
I know this one. I know this one.
You get the reward.
What?
His sister,
Mama's not kidding.
the Moses' sister watches over him through the Nile.
Right. Okay, so Mama puts baby on the Nile River. Sister's standing by watching.
Oh, yeah, the movie show.
She wants to find out what's going to happen. And lo and behold, who comes along? Who finds him?
I think I know,
Oh,
like what she's saying. This
Pharaoh's daughter. And she pulls the baby out. She grabs the basket, opens it up. There's a baby in the river. What is this? And she looks at it and goes, wait a second. He's not Egyptian. He's Hebrew. But he's crying so cute. So she takes pity on him. Okay? So sister has her thinking cap on. Okay? She's watching this. What? Anyway, sister has her thinking cap on. She goes, you know what? Pharaoh's daughter, she's not going to nurse that baby herself. Hey, Mrs. Pharaoh's daughter, do you want me to go get a Hebrew woman to nurse that baby and take care of him for you until he's not nursing anymore? Pharaoh's daughter goes, that's a good idea. Go. And so sister goes and gets Mama Levite. And so it's actually genius that this Levite woman gets to raise her own son until she weans him off before she gives him back. And she gets paid for it. Hey, Pharaoh's daughter pays her to take care of her own kid. Genius. Absolutely genius. So I want you to think about how that played out going back to Pharaoh, though. Remember, Pharaoh ordered that this kid ought to be killed. And he told the Egyptians, okay, Pharaoh's daughter, Egyptians to do the killing, right? So I have to imagine Pharaoh's daughter coming up with this baby wrapped up. Kind of like I imagine my daughter one day coming up with like this ratty little puppy dog saying, oh, Daddy, he's crying, he's so cute. Can I keep him? Can I keep him, please? He's so cute. Look. Okay, I see Stella doing this one day. She wants a puppy in the worst way. I imagine it was kind of the same way. Look, Daddy, this baby is so cute. He's fine. Can I keep him? And Pharaoh's daughter had her thinking cap on too, because what did she name him?
Moses.
Moses. Moses is a Hebrew word, right?
Which means I drew him out of the water.
Right. Moses in Hebrew means I drew him out of the water. But why would an Egyptian princess name the kid a Hebrew name?
Maybe the Egyptian princess is Hebrew. Maybe the Egyptian princess is Hebrew.
How can that be so?
Nope, she's definitely Egyptian. Here's the thing is, the word Moses is actually also an Egyptian word.
Oh.
And it means leader. So Pharaoh is looking at his daughter with this baby, and she says, guess what, Daddy? I named him Moses. And what goes off in his head? Moses means leader. I can use this kid later on, train him as an Egyptian. The Hebrews will submit to him more easily than they would submit to me as an Egyptian. It was a political tactic for him. So he says, okay, we'll keep. And so Moses is saved from a penalty of death and actually raised in Pharaoh's courts, in his own house. So that's kind of what's going on with verses 1 to 10. What happens in verse 11? What picks up there? What starts happening?
It's Moses sees an Egyptian whipping a Hebrew man, and then he starts to get angry because it's one of his people. And Moses said, "Why are you doing this to this Hebrew person?" He says, "He's not working, so I need to discipline him." Moses didn't like that, so he killed the man. And Pharaoh said, I put a penalty to kill him, so find him and kill him. But he flees to Midian.
Right. It went something like that. There's a little bit added in there.
He essentially went out there to see what all the fuss was about with the Egyptians and the Hebrews. It says he went out to spy on the Egyptians. He saw this dude getting into a scuffle or whatever with a Hebrew, kills the guy, hides him in the sand, and then people find out.
Right. He walks out, sees an Egyptian beating a Hebrew. And we're not talking about just like disciplining a slave, like what we tend to think of as disciplining slaves. This dude was beating this guy to a pulp. Okay? So Moses says, not on my watch, and he looks around to the left, to the right, make sure nobody's watching. He goes out and he kills the Egyptian. Hides the body in the sand. Next day, what happens?
They find the body.
Nope.
Oh.
Didn't say they found the body. Look at your text. Always look at the text.
The word went out.
Somebody knew about it.
He saw two Hebrews fighting over it, and he kind of walks up to it and he's like, what's all the fuss about?
Well, they weren't fighting over what happened the day before.
Yeah,
they were just fighting
yeah.
amongst themselves. And he says, guys, what's going on? And the dude that's at fault, what does he say?
Like, who are you to tell me what to do? Because you killed the Egyptian yesterday. Are you gonna do that to me?
Right. But look at the specific wording of what he says.
Who made you a prince and judge over us?
Who made you a prince and judge over us? Okay? Prince makes sense. And in a way, Moses was a prince, but he was an Egyptian prince, so far as they were concerned. Judge. What do you think of when you talk about the word judge? Or you describe someone as a judge?
Judgment.
Okay, judgment. They make a decision.
Oh.
Okay.
Aren't they essentially saying, who are you to judge what's going on? He killed the Egyptian dude. He thought that this dude should die. He was judging him. So they're kind of saying, what makes you able to judge us? Why are you the one passing the death sentence?
Right. That's one layer to the word. See, the Hebrew word has a couple layers of meaning here. That idea of a judge is one of them.
It's saying isn't it another way of saying if if you did something that was similar to that, why would you even criticize me and do it the same way?
Right. That's the argument that they're making.
Yeah.
Okay. That's the fight they're having with Moses now. But I want to pause for a second and look at the layers of meaning of this word judge. Who made you a prince and a judge? Okay, we know that they're talking about who gives you the right to make a judgment on whatever we're arguing about. But we also have another book called Judges. Now, what did those judges do? What was their function?
They ruled the land.
Right, they were rulers. They were leaders. Right? Makes sense? So there's another layer. As they could also be saying, who made you a prince and a ruler or a leader among us? You're an Egyptian. You're not one of us. Why should we follow your lead? Okay? There's one more layer to this. And that is the idea of a deliverer. And so it's very interesting that they would use this word with that undertone of someone who's going to deliver, is going to save them. He doesn't do it now, but they're essentially saying, what makes you think you can bring us any kind of salvation? But if you've read ahead in the story at all, you know that that's exactly what God uses him to do. Oddly enough.
Foreshadowing.
Here we go. We're going to get there. So, verse 11, Moses kills, then he runs, right? Where does he run to?
Runs to Midian.
Midian. He runs to Midian, and he gets married. He kills, he runs, and he gets married. How would you like that for a day? Okay?
That would be awesome.
Now,
I'm not killing
a couple of things about the Midianites. The Midianites were some of the descendants of Abraham through one of his other sons, right? Now, who also came from Abraham? Isaac, and then Jacob, and then
Joseph.
and Joseph, and then
Moses.
No, Zipporah?
Moses.
Oh, no.
Okay? And the entire nation, 2 million people of Israel. That makes the nation of Israel and the Midianites distant cousins. They are related. Now, there's a lot between them. Okay? They're not like brother, sister, close family, but they are very distant cousins. And it turns out that the Midianites lived way far away from Egypt. Okay? If you can picture where Egypt is, if Egypt's right here, you have the Sinai Peninsula right here, and then you have Edom over here, and there's like an ocean splitting the Sinai Peninsula out. Right through here at the bottom, that's where the Midianites lived. Okay? It's not like going from here to Holy. Okay? Moses ran, and it probably took him a couple months to get there. Okay? He ran far as he could stand to go. And when he gets there, he's sitting at a well, and what happens? What happens at the well?
There are girls trying to water their camels and flocks and herds, and
Right.
there's shepherds attacking them. So
Right.
he shoos off the shepherds and then waters everything for them.
Right. And then they go back, tell their daddy about it. The daddy says, well, why didn't you bring the guy home? And so they go back, get him, bring him home, and he ends up marrying one. Okay? It's a port. So that's, and an interesting little note, his father-in-law, his other name is Jethro. And it turns out he is very likely, it says he's a priest of Midian. He's probably a priest of the Most High God. He's probably a priest based on his other name. What was his other name? Ruel. Okay. Looking at some linguistics on that, he was probably a priest of Elohim. Get it? Ruel, Elohim. He's probably a priest of the one true God. So they're not crossing religions here. Okay? It's not like Moses is going and marrying some pagan. He's marrying a worshiper of the one true God. By far more than likely. Alright, so after all that happens, he kills, he runs, and he gets married. Last paragraph. What's going on?
Israel cries out to God for rescue from slavery.
Right, what happens before that?
You're the baby.
Well, yeah, he has a kid while he's out.
Oh, yeah.
But after that, look at the text.
King of Egypt dies.
Right. Pharaoh dies again. Pharaoh dies again. Now, do you think he knows anything about Moses? But he continues the persecution of the Israelites. In fact, we have some indication that he made it even worse. So Pharaoh dies again. Israel cries out. And God knew. Love that. So that's the content of these 2 chapters. That's what's going on. But there are a couple questions I want to hit on here. Some issues of morality in this. We want to look at the characters and find out, did they do things right or should they have done things differently? Going back to the Hebrew midwives, and this is one that's debated and talked about a lot. When they lied to Pharaoh, assuming, of course, that they lied, but when they lied to Pharaoh, were they morally in the wrong? Was that sin?
No.
No?
Not my point of view.
Why?
They were defending innocent lives.
Okay. So it's okay to lie if you're defending an innocent life. Okay?
I think, in my opinion, it's a lie is a lie no matter what. If you go around saying, well, if a life is at stake or a lie, then it's just going to fall apart. The entire principle is you shouldn't lie. There's just going to be people, like, finding loopholes in someone dying, like, someone could have this disease, I'm going to lie about it. It just doesn't work. A lie is a lie no matter what.
Okay. I would give you that. The lie is a lie. But is there such a thing as a legitimate justification for a lie? That's where the question really comes in. Kale?
I think that there is like a legitimate justification for a lie, just in certain points in the Bible, because God like blesses some people kind of who sort of lie. Like here, it's all right like that they lied, and then also in Joshua when Rahab lied to the people in the army about the spies being like in their home, like it was okay.
I have scripture to back up.
Before we keep going, 1 second, I just want to make kind of a little bit of a side point. We've talked twice now about from my point of view, and we've talked about what I think. Does my point of view and what I think really matter by itself?
No.
By itself.
No. I was
No.
gonna.
What does matter is what the scriptures say. So, we want to look at this and ask the question, biblically, what do we see in scripture that will tell us if these women were wrong? Give me the scripture.
Well, it says after they explain to Pharaoh, the Hebrew women are vigorous, and they give birth before we come and help them. In verse 20 it says, so God dealt well with the midwives and gave them families.
Right. Because of what, though?
Because of them defending innocent lives.
No. Look at your text. Because of what?
Because they feared God.
Because they feared God. That's an important detail.
In the 10 Commandments, a lie is a lie. It's not. It's a sin, but I think those people were dealt well with because they feared God, because they saved them. They could have come up with something else besides lying. They could have been truthful and ran away.
Wait.
Okay. Well, here's an interesting point, because that's the argument that it keeps going back to. Is what does the 10 Commandments say? What does that commandment actually say? Someone quote it for me. Quote it for me.
Thou shalt not lie.
No, that's not what it says.
No.
Nope. No, that's a paraphrase. That's an interpretation. But what does it actually say?
Let me go to it.
Shall not bear false witness.
You shall not bear false witness. Okay? It's actually more of a judicial term. It means you won't lie about someone else. Okay? It's actually more specific than what we generally assume it to be. Now, granted, there are other passages that talk about deceit being wrong. And this is very much deceit, no doubt. But be careful using that 10 Commandments argument, because if you really study it, that's a little more specific than what we assume it to be.
I think also too, and it's a minor point, but we also gotta look at the 10 Commandments were not here yet. So just the fact that they feared God and they acted upon that and came up with an answer or a solution or a way to do it, it's hard to say if it was good or not, or if they were supposed to lie or not. But just the fact that they feared God and you know, you could say that God put in our hearts to find a way to get through it so the child can live.
This becomes a very deep discussion, and we're not going to lay out a hardcore answer, but it's one of those things I want you to think about. And you have to think about all of the instances where this happens, where this sort of a thing happens. Like here, it says, because the midwives feared God, he gave them families. It says that God dealt well with the midwives. It says, so, because of what they did, and it's saying, because they lied to save a life, God dealt well with them. It's kind of hard to be concrete about it. With Rahab, every commentator I've ever read says God blessed Rahab not despite the fact that she lied. She believed God, and so she protected the spies. And they say he blessed her for that in spite of it. He kind of ignored the fact that she lied to do it. Go back and look at those passages. Okay? One more comment.
So what you're saying is, essentially, is lying is wrong, but God still blessed these people. He more or less overlooked it.
That's what pretty much every commentator I've ever read says.
He didn't really overlook it because ultimately the penalty for sin is death.
Right, but that's what this becomes a question of is this lie, because of the circumstance, is it excusable? Is it really sin? That's what the question comes down to.
I think it is. I don't think it is.
Well, we're going to leave that question there for you to think about and look over for yourself. We need to move on. But it's something you need to consider, because there are several instances where someone does something that under normal circumstances would be wrong, but because they were protecting innocent life, they are blessed. You have to answer, were they still wrong in it? Or is it justified? Next, moral question. Moses kills an Egyptian man because he's beating a Hebrew slave. Is Moses wrong? And again, I'll warn you now, I'm not going to give you a pat, easy answer. There's not one. But think about it for a minute. Okay? Going back to the Ten Commandments that haven't been given yet. It says, thou shalt not murder. Murder is killing someone without just cause.
I think Moses wasn't wrong because is that the Egyptian wasn't like he was actually hurting the Israelite. He was like almost trying to kill him. And even though I don't want to hear how she said about the Ten Commandments because it never existed yet. Mm-hmm. And Moses did have a reason to kill the person. His reason was he was beating one of God's people to death.
Mm-hmm. So it was a matter of defending someone who couldn't defend themselves. Okay, I see that argument. Do you have something?
I was going to say, would it be defense?
Right, and biblically, is defense a sin? If you take someone's life because they are threatening innocent life, is that a sin? No, the Bible actually commands it. The Bible has instances where it commands it. Caleb?
Well, also, I know this isn't like the New Testament, but the Bible also talks about being like submissive to like people who, in like First Peter, people who are like above you. So in this case, the Israelites, they were under the Egyptians, so they needed to submit to those people.
Right. It's difficult to draw conclusions from that because we don't know why the Egyptian was beating the Israelite and to what extent. That makes a difference too. That makes a difference too, because in other places in the Old Testament it talks about Deuteronomy and Leviticus especially talk about how Israelites are to treat their slaves, and they are not to beat them. In which case, self-defense would have been justified, and it wasn't a matter of submitting to your authorities; it was a matter of preserving life. So it's hard to draw a conclusion from that fact, but it is one to bring up. Caleb.
Okay, so Moses was an Egyptian prince. In my mind, it brings up the thought: Why did he not just call other Egyptian guards to come and pull this guy off of the Israelite?
Probably wasn't illegal by Egyptian law.
Actually, if
Because the point
Well,
was to kill off
that's true.
the Hebrews.
even if he called the guards down, they won't hurt the Egyptian because he's an Egyptian. They would just keep hurting. If he called more,
That's
they just keep hurting them.
possible. It's speculation, but it's possible.
Is it
Last
really?
thought.
Is it really Joseph's place to call judgment on the Egyptians? That's
Moses' place.
Moses.
Right.
What did I say?
Joseph.
Joseph.
Anyway,
Anyhow, is it really his place to call judgment on that? Like, he's just going over there and spying this guy, sees this guy, no warning, just knocks him up the head and buries him in the sand.
Well, he's a human being.
Yeah.
right. But he was still defending a man who was being beat to death.
Still was.
Okay, this probably wasn't just one punch on the cheek and done.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, Cecil.
Real quick, sorry. It fascinates me how God uses these moral situations, just because this was the situation that made, God used that because this was the situation that made Moses flee. So again, God used this situation for His purpose, but I don't know. He killed him. It's
Right.
murder. So
Yeah, well, but that's the question: is it murder or is it defense? And there's a big difference there, and we have to recognize.
right, and
that.
it's vague in the
Well,
scriptures.
and here's something else to think about: is Moses didn't want to get caught doing it
right.
because it says he saw it happen, and instead of just going in and taking care of it, he looked around.
Mm-hmm.
Is anybody going to see me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's on.
So
there was something in his head that made him question whether or not he should do this. We don't know what that was.
right, and it's vague. It's vague.
You're
but
right,
It's, but
it's
almost.
very vague.
It's almost. You say he looked around, so it's almost. I don't want to use the word premeditated, but yeah, but
There's a measure of premeditation to it.
but if you ask me, was there other options? I think there were.
Quite possibly. But again, we don't have
Right.
enough details of the situation to really have a concrete answer on this. But it is something to consider because these kinds of situations do come up even today. Even today. Okay? I'm sorry, guys. We got to move on a little bit. Okay, so Moses kills the man, hides the body, comes up the next day, and there's two Hebrews arguing, fighting. Was he right or wrong to intervene? To step in and try to mediate between those two?
He was right because he was stopping a fight.
Okay?
I think it was right because he's in a place of power at that point.
Yeah, he has some authority. He lives in Pharaoh's house. Okay?
I think he was right because they could have killed each other. And actually, even though he had the authority, in the Bible it did say in Exodus, it did say that they said to him in where was it again? I just had it with me. It's just with me. Okay, here it is. It says here in verse 14, he answered, "Who made you a prince and a judge over us?" That's what they told him when he tried to stop.
Right. So it's hard to tell from that statement, though, whether he was right or wrong. But he was. It becomes a matter of should he have stuck his nose into something that wasn't his business, or was it his business? I would argue that it was. There's your one pat answer for the night. Okay.
Would it also be because he was Hebrew too? Because there were two Hebrews fighting?
Right. He's a brother. Whether they recognize that or not, he is. Okay, Kayla, last thought.
But I think he's like on the fence. He's Egyptian and yet Hebrew, and he can't it might be sad to be that way.
Oh damn.
But really, he should kind of stick to one side instead of
Yeah.
getting into each other's business. He's kind of like a spy who's not being loyal to one side.
Well, and we've used the word spy. I think that's what your version said, right?
Yep.
The King James. The word spy there, it simply means to look on. It wasn't like he was sneaking around trying to find information. He was just watching what was happening. But Kayla, you're right. He does need to make a decision about who he's going to be. And he does make that decision. We'll see later on. Got to move on. Sorry about that. This is really what I wanted to get to. Have you guys ever seen Robin Hood Men in Tights?
Oh.
I love that movie. It's probably not a good movie, but if you've seen it, do you remember the scene where there's a sheet hanging down, and Robin Hood and the princess, I forget her name. It doesn't matter. Anyway, they get behind it, and he's like singing to her and like blowing her hair around with his voice and all this other stuff, and it's really funny. But what do you see? You're not actually seeing them. What do you see?
Seeing an image.
An image. A
Fake image.
it's real image. It's a shadow.
Oh.
Okay? Fight scene between him and the sheriff of Nottingham. Or Rottingham. Okay? In that fight scene, they're sword fighting and they end up behind another sheet. I don't know why there was a sheet hanging up, but they're behind a sheet no, they're behind a wall and there's light shining. Anyway, what you see is their shadows fighting. And then all of a sudden they make a duck and a dog and go at it and the dog loses. Which is really funny because a dog would normally tear a duck up. I don't know. Anyway, but what you saw there were shadows. Now if all you saw were the shadows, could you tell what color his tights were?
No.
No. Okay? Could you tell what color that feather in his hat was? No. So you see an image of him. You see an image of Robin Hood, but you don't see the details. But if you know him, you can recognize him. Jesus told the Pharisees, the law and the prophets, what they wrote, that whole Old Testament, that was all a picture, a shadow of me. Everything in the Old Testament was intended to point people to Jesus. Now, if that is true, and Jesus said it, so I'm assuming it is, that means Pharaoh is somehow creating a shadow to point to Jesus. I want to go through a couple of ways that he does that. And what we want to see is how Jesus is a better Pharaoh. Now, we've used two words interchangeably. Pharaoh and what other word?
King.
King. Pharaoh of Egypt, king of Egypt. Same thing. Okay? And when we think of a king, we think of someone who has absolutely no authority above them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, actually, think about like the King of England around the time of the Revolution. Did he have absolute authority? No, he had a parliament to deal with, right? See, that's not the way it was in Egypt at this time. Pharaohs had no other authorities above them. They had no one to answer to. In fact, they were treated and viewed as gods. And so he is in a very similar position as Jesus is now, as we see him, as our king. Pharaoh was a king, Jesus is our king. Let's take a minute and look at how Pharaoh was a king, but Jesus is a better king, a better Pharaoh. First way I saw it is, in the very beginning, Pharaoh died. Does Jesus die?
No.
No. Not anymore. That makes him a better Pharaoh. The Pharaoh that rose after Joseph died was ignorant of Joseph. Is Jesus ignorant?
No.
No. That makes him a better Pharaoh. That new Pharaoh was afraid of the people because of their numbers, their masses. Is Jesus afraid? Not of anything. That makes him a better Pharaoh. The Pharaoh that rose, that was ignorant of Joseph, established taskmasters to enslave the people of Israel and to deal with them shrewdly and harshly. is Jesus a harsh taskmaster? That makes him a better Pharaoh, a better king. This Pharaoh murdered innocent children. Does Jesus murder anyone? Right. Jesus doesn't murder anyone. That makes him a better Pharaoh. Then here, Pharaoh dies again. Okay? You see, the problem here is the pharaohs keep dying. Not Jesus. That makes him a better Pharaoh. And so what we see here is Pharaoh points us to Jesus by showing us everything that Jesus doesn't lack. Okay, a bad example is a good teacher. That's what's going on here. That's how Pharaoh shows us who Jesus is, by showing us exactly who Jesus isn't. Now, this last paragraph, we see something interesting. Israel cries out, and God heard their groanings. This is stuff that Jesus does. Jesus hears us when we cry out to him. And it said that God knew. He knew that they were in trouble. He knew that they needed him. He knew everything that they were doing. And he knew what to do about it. And he knew that not only would he save them from the Egyptians, he would save them from their own sin. He knew. And he saves. You see, Pharaoh, he didn't hear the Israelites. He didn't know them. And he didn't save them. Jesus does all of those things. He did it for the Israelites, for the Hebrews, and he does it for us now, today, much the same way. Thoughts, questions, comments, concerns, rebuttals?
I just love the last paragraph, and he
knew.
I just love it. I've read that. I've already read through Exodus. I read it the first time going through Exodus. It's awesome.
It is. It is. Any other thoughts, quickly?
I liked how God always helps other people, like how he helped the Israelites come out. Is every time he always knows what you're going to do in the next step.
So basically, God knows everything about your life, even if you haven't even reached that part yet. He just knows where you're gonna go.
He knows it all. Past, present, and future. Last thought.
I like the first. I like verse 11 through 13. It is, and I just like how, in my mind, it kind of represents the gospel. Now, there's an Egyptian, aka sin, in our point of view, beating the Hebrew, also known as us, to a pulp, as you said. And sin, without Moses or Jesus intervening, is beating us to a pulp, and there's no way we'll be able to escape that. But Moses, aka Jesus, steps in, intervenes, and saves us.
Right. It is a perfect picture of the gospel. All right. Let's go ahead and stand. We'll pray, and then we'll sing and get out of here. Mike, will you pray for us, please?